Learning Objective 18-12. Understand and explain the additional disclosures that accompany government-wide financial statements. And again, I can't say enough. These last two learning objectives are extremely important. Do not ignore the format of the government, of the CAFR, and the required disclosures. So you're required to have, as I mentioned before, what's called reconciliation schedules. So what you must do is you must reconcile the net change in the amounts reported on the government fund statement with the amounts reported on the government-wide. So remember that the amounts reported in the government fund statements use modified accrual accounting, while the amounts in the government-wide statements use the accrual basis of accounting. So this needs to be reconciled both for the statement of net position and also for the statement of activities. And there needs to be a budgetary comparison too, because the budget, as I mentioned at the very beginning of Chapter 17, the budget is extremely important. So you must show budget versus actual. And you need to have an MD&A, Management's Discussion Analysis. And this would provide an analysis of all the financial results and explain them more in an operational context. Like, this is what happened in our government this year. And there are also required notes to the financial statements, just like regular financial statements. There's what we call interim reporting. Governmental entities are not required to publish interim reports, but many of them may publish monthly or quarterly reports, which would be valuable internally. Most governmental entities are audited once a year. The process of auditing is going to be very, very different from auditing a regular company. There's something called the Single Audit Act of 1984, where the federal government, and it's periodically updated, the federal government explains some basic principles for auditing state and local governments. The federal government has the authority to do this if they receive federal grants or other financial assistance from the federal government. So when the federal government issues these grants, it requires what's called a single audit, and that would be based on single audit standards as specified by the federal government. Now, there are also something called special purpose governmental entities, and these are legally separate entities, but they serve a governmental purpose. And oftentimes what happens is that they work with several different governments at the same time. They serve several different governments simultaneously, and therefore they're separate from the government. But sometimes there may be situations where they actually need to be included in the government's government-wide financial statements. So GASB 34 has requirements for these entities, and they may be engaged in more than one governmental program or governmental and business type activities. They may be engaged in a single governmental program, only business type activities, only fiduciary type activities, and things like that. But they're not quite a full government. A good example here in New Jersey is the Turnpike Authority. The Turnpike Authority is a special purpose governmental entity. It's what we call, it used to be called quasi-governmental. And it's controlled by the state of New Jersey. And I think that it needs to be included in the state of New Jersey's government-wide financial statements. It would need to be. And it's responsible for collecting tolls and maintaining the New Jersey Turnpike and the Garden State Parkway. It's interesting, they used to be separate. And why you would have separate entities doing each of them, I don't know. Another really great example of a special purpose governmental entity, and a huge one, is the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is responsible for all infrastructure that bridges between New York and New Jersey. And it's primarily focused on transportation infrastructure. So the three major airports, in addition to some smaller ones in the New York area, Newark, LaGuardia, and JFK, Newark Liberty, are all under the they were all under the authority of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. In addition, of course, there's the huge port of New York and New Jersey. They're the Port of Newark. And there are other various ports in the New York area that are governed by the Port Authority. All the bridges that go between New York and New Jersey. So, for example, the Goethals Bridge, the Verrazano Bridge is not under the Port Authority because it goes between Staten Island and Brooklyn. So it's all within New York City. But the other bridges like the Goethals Bridge and the tunnels, the Lincoln Tunnel, Holland Tunnel, the George Washington Bridge, are all under the authority of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And then the PATH train, which runs between several, it has several stops in New Jersey and several stops in New York City. So the PATH train is also under the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey. What's especially interesting about it is that half the board members are appointed by New York and half of them appointed by New Jersey. So I think I'm not sure, I don't think either one of them would include them in government-wide financial statements, but the Port Authority itself is a tremendous, is a huge organization and a very important one. Okay, as you go back over this chapter, make sure to especially focus on learning objectives 11 and 12 because those are heavily covered on the CPA exam.